take inventory
Okay.
on how you're prioritizing the things that go into getting a good training session in. Are you worrying about your meal timing and what kind of intra workout you're using and what you've got in your intra and what clothes you're wearing and how many warm-ups you're doing and those sorts of things, and not really thinking about the fact that you've got so much more in reserve that you're not tapping into in your mind?
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Scott McNally with Dr. Scott Stevenson with another segment from the Muscle Minds Bodybuilding Podcast. Today, we talk about ideas related to fatigue and failure, how much of it happens in our muscles versus how much of it happens in our minds. We're going to discuss that today. And guys, hey, if you're new here, click the subscription button along with the notification bell so you can stay up to date with everything we have coming out. All right, guys, let's get to this.
The thing, like the most important, people are talking about volume of training and, should I train heavy? Should I train light? You can train both as long as you're training to failure, you're training hard. And I was thinking about, like, what do we know about what actually limits our ability to train really, really hard? And for instance, as a topic that many people have been bantering on, there's the reps in reserve phenomenon.
Yeah.
And when people, especially newbies, estimate their reps in reserve, they are very, very often very, very far from actually being anywhere near the number of reps they can actually achieve if you take them to failure and motivate them to do that. And so I wanted to just kind of talk about, like, what do we know about the things that may limit motor output, the things that may limit fatigue, the things that may limit what you can actually do in the gym to stimulate growth and to really, really be able to train it. And I think I've heard people say that it's local. They just sort of like, it's just in the muscle. The muscle is the sort of the weak chain in the link. And literally what we're talking about here for pick a movement, whatever it may be, it's just something simple like a biceps curl.
Okay.
You've got a motor pattern in the motor cortex of the brain that comes down to the spinal cord, and then there's a neuromuscular junction there that runs to the nerves that innervate the elbow flexors, let's say the biceps brachii. And there's also a neuromuscular junction there. There's a neural junction in the spinal cord. There's a neuromuscular junction there, which is a potential locus of fatigue. And then you've got the activation pattern by which the different motor units are called upon at different firing rates and rotated amongst in order to limit fatigue. And to a large degree, we're trying to subvert much of what the nervous system has already been very, very well wired to do when we're doing bodybuilding training. We're literally trying to make the exercise as hard as possible and to use only the muscle mass we want to, as opposed to use as much muscle mass as we possibly could, which makes things easier. It reduces the relative intensity. If you just literally wanted to lift the weight up, you would just swing it, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't do a concentration curl, which is what we're trying to do. So what is you can go into the muscle and look at the contractile apparatus. You can look at, rates of ATP supply, the pH, lactic acidosis, ammonia. There's a million and one things. There's a guy named Bob Fitz, who's done a massive amount of research and literature review looking at all the different loci of fatigue. What are the things that potentially could be the reason why you're unable to do another rep at the end of a set, or you're unable to run faster. And it probably varies depending on the exercise or the particular exercise stress. So obviously running a marathon may have a different locus of fatigue than doing a 1 rep max.
Or like even if we say work in the, whatever 10 to 12 rep range, even doing a bicep curl, I think you're going to fail for a different set of reasons, or at least a slightly different set of reasons than doing a squat.
Yes.
You know, because you're gonna get winded doing a squat versus you're probably not gonna get winded, you know, doing a bicep curl. Hopefully you're not gonna get winded.
Yeah, you could get gassed out, you know,
Yeah.
if you get cardiorespiratory stress.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing, and they're literally, yes, the circumstances and sort of the mix of fatiguing factors vary across the spectrum. Anything from an all-out, you know, 3-second 1-rep max to a 2-hour marathon effort. We'll just consider that kind of the range.
Okay.
But the thing that's really interesting, and this is what this figure is, and we'll get to this in just a second, but is that Tim Noakes has put forth this idea that in large part, if you look at many of these different circumstances, you can actually, although those things are true, you know, the extent to which how much you can squat is a function of the muscle mass that you have available. It's a function of the biomechanics that you have available to you. It's a function of the motor output you're able to generate. And in large, if we kind of trace it back to like what is really the limiting factor, Noakes' idea, which is where that figure comes from, and the one that I think probably is more important than any local muscular fatigue effect or anything on up the line is our brain. It's literally, there is in what he calls a brain-derived emotion, which is what he calls fatigue. There's something in the brain that is ultimately the limiter for driving those other aspects of human performance. So let me toss out some ideas. So this is going to be sort of a kind of cornucopia of ideas, because this is like one of the essential key aspects of exercise physiology and exercise science is what limits human performance. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
It's like one of the central thoughts. So I can't do it justice here, you know, with just a podcast like this. Like literally you could do an entire class on this, a graduate level course easily. And people like Fitz have spent an entire careers looking into this. But so like one thing that people will sometimes suggest is that it's fairly common that you can maximally activate skeletal muscle. So they'll have someone do a knee extension, and what you can do during an all-out maximal isometric knee extension is superimpose upon that knee extension an electrical stimulation stimulus. And if you see that, like, let's say without any voluntary contraction, you got 50% of max effort with the E-stim. So you can produce 100 newtons, 1,000, let's say 1,000 newtons with max effort, and you get 500 with the E-stim. That tells you that you're getting about half as many neurons activated with E-stim as what you can voluntarily. And so then you go to 1,000, and if you superimpose that E-stim and you get no increase in force, that would suggest that you're already activating all of those neurons that the E-stim activated. Makes sense, right? Yeah, because they're already going voluntarily. When you add the E-stim, it doesn't add anything to the force. So that would suggest you've got maximal activation. Well, the thing is, they can do those sorts of tests in like older folks before they start resistance training. And I've seen this in studies, and it's just bizarre. They don't even account for this. And those people will increase strength by like 50 or 80% in a matter of weeks. They didn't increase muscle mass by 50 or 80% in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
That's a neural phenomenon. They learn how to activate more. The other thing with that test that a lot of people cite, and it's just bizarre to me, is that when you add the E-stim, you're actually sending the electrical current sends a depolarization wave down to the muscle cells through the nerves, but also goes backwards too. So it interferes with anything coming down from your brain. So there's a prodromic and what's called antidromic directionality to this. So when we've done that in the lab, when I was back in grad school and we would do this, most of the time when you add the E-stim, the force would go down because you're sending signals back up to the brain, which was canceling the signals coming down from the brain.
Really?
So I took the class, so yeah.
You got all excited.
I know, I got all excited. I was reaching up to my brain and cut my glasses. So like that, they call that percent motor unit activation. Sometimes it's called the central activation ratio. it suggests that many people can maximally activate skeletal muscle. Whereas in a practical real world setting, you train them and you see dramatic increases in strength, especially in older folks, in a matter of weeks and months. It's like, well, how can they have gone from 100%, their 100% maximal activation, and then they get 40% stronger in 2 months, and they didn't gain 40% more muscle mass?
Yeah.
They certainly so how did that happen? It's because that test really wasn't accurate. So that's like one idea. Like, so what's going? We don't. That's not a good test of that. That's the thing that people would say. Oftentimes, put forth say, yeah, we can maximally activate the skeletal muscle. The brain's not a limitation. And you can do those kinds of tests too while people are doing fatiguing efforts. So like they're doing it all out. They're pushing, and then just have them push as hard as they can for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and then you add the stim and see what kind of a blip in force you get. But it's still subject to that same issue with the antidromic repolarization ways. So there's a study that I talked about in an article on Elite FTS. One of my favorite studies, I may have talked about it here, it was published in 1961 in the Journal of Applied Physiology. So that's one of the premier high impact journals. It's been around for forever. Anyone who reads exercise science shit, JAP is badass. You get published in JEP and you're legit, without a doubt. This is a long time ago. And what they did is they had people do some untrained, and then they had one highly trained, I think he was like a world-class weightlifter, Olympic weightlifter, just isometric elbow flexion. And they wanted to see if there are some ways in which they could improve force, or basically remove the inhibition on maximal expression of human force that they think exists. So they did some shit you can't do. You can't do this stuff anymore. It's just they're not going to get. You can't do this, and it's not going to get past the Human Subject Committee. They got them drunk. They had a pretest, and they gave them alcohol.
Yeah,
they got stronger. The alcohol disinhibited, as it's known to do socially. They gave them amphetamines, increase in strength. They injected them with adrenaline, increase in strength. That's something that, for instance, elite cyclists do too. Like some of the guys who are like on like the Tour de France, and some of those long multi-leg, they will like have an EpiPen, like hidden in somewhere in their trunks or whatever, and then they pull it out and just jam themselves in the butt. Yeah, and then they take off. It's like jet fuel.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's. I don't know how
they do a lot of crazy stuff.
Those guys go for it, man. So. They did what we used to call this in high school the screamer. So they're like pushing, and then one of the experimenters came up and went, ah! Screamed right in their ear. More strength. Yeah. They had a starter gun. Like no bullets, but loud noise and puff of smoke. Yeah. Came up and shot the starter gun off right next to them. You had an increase in strength.
Gets you amped. Yeah.
Yeah. And they also hypnotized them. And I want to read some stuff from this particular study that thought was pretty cool.
Okay.
Let me see here if I can find it. So they had one of the subjects. Let's see here. Where's this woman?
I wish we could have had Pete Siegel on, the hypnotist.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, he was. He worked with Tom Platz and a bunch of other people.
We had a guy at my my gym in Tucson who did that.
Yeah.
He did the work with me. That's another, we get way off topic, did that, but he used to work with like golfers.
Oh yeah.
I mentioned he helped them visualize winning. Like there's a lot of these guys who are like making like, I can't remember the name of the game was, but they like bet like 1,000 or 5,000 on a hole.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is from the Sakai and Steinhaus, 1961, published in the journal. The effectiveness of hypnotic suggestions might well be enhanced if they could be pinpointed on the major inhibitions that hold back performance. These must vary with each person and no doubt are usually unknown to the subject. In our series, we attempted after hypnosis to uncover such causes. So they literally did a little interview with their subjects. Several subjects recalled that parents had expressed fear of their overdoing. Of special interest is a woman, BC figure 9, who under hypnosis exceeded by more than 50% of her pre-hypnosis strength. Subject since childhood to serious asthmatic attacks, she recalled her mother's constant warnings that overdoing might precipitate an attack. Then in high school, this athletically inclined yet genuinely feminine subject was nicknamed, quote, Ms. Football by her peers. Thus, any expression of physical prowess became associated also with the pain of social disgrace. So you got to remember, this is probably like the 1940s or something like that.
Yeah.
Knowing only of her asthmatic attacks, the hypnotist did suggest that she would be able to breathe easily while exerting herself maximally, that she could pull very hard without any worry of any kind, and that she would feel wonderful while doing it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they cued in to what was limiting her. Yeah. So here's my favorite part of this study. This is the Journal of Applied Physiology. So this is in their methods section. They're talking about this, the guy, the Olympic weightlifter, who really didn't get much of an effort. He had already learned how to disinhibit. So the hypnosis really didn't work on him, but he also didn't think hypnosis was jack shit. So they write, the post-hypnotic suggestion of weakness was, however, very effective as in the other 6 cases. So they could actually tell him he was weak, and that worked.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, but he couldn't get any more strength. So he was amenable to that. To satisfy ourselves and him that he really had been hypnotized, he was told that the hypnotist would brand his hand with a red-hot poker, and this would cause a blister to form. When he was touched with the hypnotist's closed fountain pen, he screamed. The blister that appeared within the hour took a week to heal and served to convince the subject of the reality of hypnosis.
So this is some really crazy out there stuff, but this is in, as you said, a legit journal of medicine. The
Journal of Applied Physiology. I'll send you the reference if you want to add it up.
So he got a blister from being told that he was going to be burned, but then he was touched with a ballpoint pen, not heated up in any way.
Nope. And
the power of the mind
is the power of the mind. What is the biological, physiological, biochemical mechanism whereby without any heat injury, a blister would form? What triggers that? How is it that the mind conveys to that local area of the epidermis that there has been trauma that necessitates blistering when there has not been any trauma? How does that happen? There are no nerves going. There's no neural route. There's no let's turn on the blister feature. There's nothing there. There's no pre-programmed genetic program for doing such a thing that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
But they said that it happened. So
So to our point in bodybuilding about trying to be the best that we can in the gym, and all the talk that we've had about progressive overload, especially in the last year. I mean, you can use that same power, I guess, is what I'm thinking. Apply that same mindset,
There's tremendous, literally, strength available to us.
Yeah.
That we don't call upon. There's all these accounts of women lifting cars off to free their children who've been trapped after a car accident. Those things happen on great regular basis. The Kalenjin Kenyans, the Kenyans who they're just dominating marathon running.
Yeah.
So they have a particular, very, very strong, deeply ingrained societal perspective on pain and pain tolerance.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Oh, yeah. It's super important for them. So people have looked is it a matter of, do they, is it the altitude that gives them some sort of an advantage? And they've also looked at sort of the nature of their limbs being sort of small and minimal wind resistance. And they're engineered really well biomechanically and physiologically for being really good at these types of endurance events. So I'm looking at an article from NPR that I found. There's various of them out there. So, or is it mental toughness is the name of the subsection. I can send you this link too. And so, of course, when many of us turn on the Olympics, we want to feel that we're watching more than a contest of physics or physical destiny. Consider the famous 1,500-meter upset at the 1968 Mexico Olympics. Oops, hold on. Let me move forward. I want to jump past that. So the initiation ceremony, manners soon learned that they were practicing for initiation ceremony, a rite of passage that is all about enduring pain.
Okay.
Kipgujai, 19, remembers going through the ceremony at age 15. So this is all men. This is a rite of passage for manhood.
Yeah.
In the canyons of this Kalenjin area. So first he says he had to crawl mostly naked through a tunnel of African stinging nettles.
Ooh.
Then he was beaten on the bony part of the ankle. Then his knuckles were squeezed together and the formic acid from the stinging nettle was wiped onto his genitals.
Oh.
But all that was just a warm-up. Early one morning, he was circumcised with a sharp stick.
I'd rather get like jumped into the crypts, you know?
Yeah. During the whole process, the crawling, the beatings, and the cutting, Kipgujai was obliged to be absolutely stoically unflinching. He could not make a sound. Indeed, in some versions of the ceremony, mud is caked on the face, and then the mud is allowed to dry. If a crack appears in the mud, your cheek may twitch, your forehead may crinkle. You get labeled a kabetit, a coward.
Which is a little bitch. Yeah.
A little bitch, and stigmatized by the whole community.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
good God.
Literally, if you think about it, your life as a member of your people is dependent upon your ability to withstand pain and suffering, so to speak, and torment.
Yeah.
Imagine if you went in the gym with that mindset.
Hey, can I come full circle for just a second? Because we were talking about the importance of that community in the gym and going to a gym where you have hardcore people. That's it right there.
Absolutely.
That's what you get from it.
Absolutely. The right ones. Yeah. That's what a good training partner does.
Yeah.
That's what that competitiveness, like you're like, I'm not going to let him beat me. I'm going to get one more rep or what have you.
Yeah.
So but this is an extreme example. And these guys are just kicking everyone's ass.
Yeah.
There's some physiological reasons for that, but there's a strong psychological, societal, sort of mental rationale for that.
Yeah.
So I think I've always thought that's fascinating. You can find, I think there's a TED Talk about them as well.
Huh.
There's a really cool information out there. So one of the things then that this is where this figure comes in, and there's this guy named Tim Noakes wrote a paper that and people were sort of he was a sort of a classically trained exercise physiologist and like doing some endurance related stuff. He's got a really cool paper on that I cite in my Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book about the extent to which the kidneys can handle fluid, and so he's a renal physiologist, he's an exercise physiologist, and a lot of times, and they joke about it, like knowing like we're missing the boat here, but they joke about it and say, and Ed Coyle used to do this, he did a lot of work for Gatorade, looking at like endurance factors that predict endurance performance. And he's like, you've got all these things, you got lactate threshold, you got VO2 max, you got mitochondrial density, you've got capillarization, you've got fiber type, you've got the economy of running, blah, 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 blah. And then you got this big black box up top that's directing all of this. Yeah. And like, okay, like it was like just the big black box. It's like, well, that's the brain. Like, just going to call it a big black box? Like what else? There's nothing else going on in there. So if you can, Scott, if you can throw this figure up that is from that paper.
The one that you texted me earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It says fatigue. This is the title of Tim's paper. Fatigue is a brain-derived emotion that regulates the exercise behavior to ensure the protection of the whole body homeostasis. And if I can, there we go. I'll pull it up. So he's basically connected way too much literature to go through, but I'll just kind of touch upon some of the things. So up top, he's got some centrally acting performance modifiers. He's central meaning the brain here. Sometimes people refer to the heart being central, but we're talking about the brain. So the emotional state someone's in, their extent of mental fatigue, that's been shown to be a predictor of performance. That's in the brain. Are you in a good mood? Have you been? They can mentally fatigue people with non-physiological stressors, and then that has an impact on physiological performance, what you assume is physiological. Sleep deprivation. Good way to ensure a shitty workout? Don't sleep. It's going to impact things. Level of motivation and degree of self-belief. So self-efficacy has been shown as well. Like, do you think you can do these things?
Yeah.
Superstitions? Absolutely. Or monetary reward? Totally will drive people.
Sure.
You want to get someone to perform, a monetary reward will work really well. presence of competitors or knowledge of endpoints. So this is some really cool stuff. They do things where they have people ride like with do like a time trial in the lab, and they have like a competitor that's riding next to them, like a pacemaker. And if they drive that pacemaker in a certain way, they'll improve performance because they're competing against that person. And your performance also depends. You pace yourself based on your endpoint. So they can, and here's an example. This is my favorite one. They've done this in the lab with endurance exercise, but you see this. Tom Platz used to do this with people, and he did it with John Meadows in one of their videos. Speaking of John, who we just had on a couple of weeks ago, and Tom would get someone to where most people would probably stop. Like they would probably say they have 2 or 3 reps in reserve, and he'd say, "Give me 5 more."
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
And they do 5 more, thinking that that's their endpoint, knowledge of endpoint. Yeah. And then he'd say, "Give me 5 more." Like, okay, they've just reset the endpoint in their mind. It's like, well, if I do 5, then I'm done.
Right.
I'll do 5 because then I'll be done. And then he says, "Give me 5 more." And the only thing that's driving having done 15 more reps is because he's inserted a different knowledge of what the endpoint of the exercise of the set is.
Yeah.
That changes performance. So amphetamines, caffeine, amphetamines we talked about with the Kai and Steinhaus, caffeine, pseudoephedrine, modafinil, all those things have been shown. They've injected bupropion, interleukins seem to make a difference. A lot of this has to go with brain chemistry. Naloxone and acetaminophen, those are involved with pain. Will make a huge difference for many people. Placebos, remember the placebo study with the Diana ball?
Yes, yeah.
Gigantic. That's a huge effect. That was the tremendous rate of strength gain after they were given the placebo.
And told all the benefits of Diana ball.
Yeah, they believed and they knew that they were going to grow because they were on the gear, baby.
Yeah.
So accurate or deceptive conscious feedback. So sometimes you can, and this relates to Rosenthal effects to a certain degree, whereby experimenters can impact the performance of the subject by like literally giving them inadvertently, like unconsciously, feedback on how well they're doing.
Yeah.
So if you tell someone they're riding along or they're doing, it's like, okay, you're doing okay. Yeah, you're a little behind where you were last time. You're gonna have to keep going, or like, if let's say you're trying to test rep velocity, which is a predictor of fatigue. So you can look at literally rep velocity and use that to predict how many reps are left. And you start saying, your rep velocity it's getting a little lower. It's going down. You literally could give them immediate feedback on that. And if you tell them it's worse than what it actually is, they will up the ante in a way that they wouldn't. This is all in the brain. One that we're doing with one thing that Chris Barricat's got a study going on with right now here in Tampa at University of Tampa is carbohydrate mouth rinsing.
Okay.
So you can get an ergogenic effect. He's doing it with resistance exercise, but you can get an ergogenic effect for sure in endurance exercise by having people just rinse their mouth with a carbohydrate containing solution. Not an artificial sweetener one, but actually real carbs, but don't swallow it.
Yeah.
So they're not getting the fluid. They're not getting the carbs. Both of those things, fluids and carbs, can help with endurance exercise performance. But this is just the rinsing. This is just what's feeding back to the brain to tell the brain, there's carbs and water around. We're good to go.
Right.
Really psychological. Prior experience obviously makes a huge difference. And then there's all sorts of visual feedback tests they've done where they provide feedback. Here, the guy's beating you, that your pacemaker or what have you. So those are all central up in the brain. So, and I won't go through the rest of this because it'd just be me sort of reading through it. But there's a tremendous amount of evidence suggesting really that all those things play a role. The fiber type, the muscle mass that you have. Obviously, if you take somebody who weighs 300 pounds or somebody who weighs 200 pounds and all other things being equal, the 300-pounder is going to be stronger, the bigger, stronger person. But the penultimate performance of that person on that day in that circumstance is largely it's going to be a function of to what extent the mind is a servant to your wishes. And I want to kind of close this. This is a pretty cool. I don't know if there's any questions that are popping up as I'm going through this, but
no, I think people are just following along with this with this thread of thought here.
The last, I'm looking now at this article from 2005, the one that Noakes wrote, and at the very end, he says something which I thought was pretty cool, pretty profound. So let's see here if I can find it. He says, Vince Lombardi, the great American football coach, once wrote that fatigue makes cowards of us all. But he was wrong, for his arrow of causation points in the wrong direction. It is cowardice that exasperates the sensations of fatigue, the reverse. And that fits back actually with the Kalenjins. Like literally you would be noted as a coward. You go into that gym and you're a pussy if you can't push, you know, to the bitter end. Those things are ultimately what's there. We don't think about that. But I really think that the brain and your desire and your passion and those sort of things are trainable, obviously.
Sure, absolutely,
you know,
they are.
You've gone and you've been there. And the thing is interesting about like going to that point where you're like, oh fuck, I think I'm going to die, you know, like you're at the end of like a widowmaker of squats or what have you. Is just recognizing, at least for me, is that it's never going to get easier if you're doing it right. Because although you may, and this comes back to the nature of progressive overload. This is, hold on here. I'm going to get back where I can see you. Is that people talk about progressive overload in kind of in two ways. And I think that both of them sort of apply. Is that progressive overload is something that's evoked by upping the training stimulus, by adding reps or getting more reps or using more weight.
Okay.
And that's true. And also, but progressive overload is something that manifests in the gym by being able to do more reps with a given load or being able to lift a heavier load for the same number or more reps. So if you've recovered adequately and progressive overload has done what it's supposed to do, then you'll just be able to simply do those things in the gym. You will get stronger because you're training hard enough to make yourself stronger. So the two things feed into one another. Train hard enough to evoke the adaptations that allow you to train harder, to evoke the adaptations that allow you to train harder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is, in order to make that sort of that continuous circle of training adaptation of progressive overload work, is that you still need to train in a way that evokes adaptations. So adaptation to training means that any given load becomes relatively easier. So if you take your bench press from 200 to 300 pounds, then 185 was pretty heavy at the 200 when your 200 was your max. 185 is nothing. So that's the epitome of training adaptations. But if you rest on the laurel of those adaptations and say, well, start training in a way that's easier because now you're stronger, you will no longer evoke the progressive overload cycle that you're trying to do. So if those widowmakers, when you're weak, relatively speaking, or you're a beginner and you're not nearly as strong as when you're very, very strong and you've become advanced, those widowmakers are still going to be hard as shit. They have to be. In fact, they may have to be even harder because now you've got the rate of diminishing returns in play. And if you don't train harder than once you did, eking out greater gains in a situation where you're less likely to get those is going to be even more difficult and even less likely if you're not training harder than what you did before.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, and a lot of that's just right here. And you have to literally come to like, this is like, I've been doing this. This is going to be just as hard as last time. I'm going to feel like dying. I'm going to get, that claustrophobic, like my heart's going to jump out of my,
oh God, yeah.
Or that I'm nauseated or whatever it may be, like whatever. And it's an interesting thing because in so many pursuits, like take you as a podcaster, Scott.
Sure.
So you, like, I remember when, like when you first started, like, it was like, you were stepping in for, what's his name who passed?
for Taylor.
Taylor
Normandeau.
Yeah. So, it's like you got big shoes to step in, and now you're much more experienced than Taylor ever was.
Yeah.
He had a couple of years under his belt, but that was a big deal. You stepped in, you wanted to did him justice, and you were relatively green. And now anything that you'd done back then is all that's easy for you. Starting off a show, maybe like a little bit of helpful nervousness to kind of get things going, but you're not like freaking out or anything like that. It's all easier. So that's an example of you've gotten much better from doing something.
Yeah.
Thing about driving greater gains in the gym, the more advanced and the bigger you get, is that phenomenon does not apply. If anything, it's kind of the opposite. It's not like, well, now that I've been doing this for a while, I can go and do a Widowmaker, and Widowmaker's nothing. You may be able to train with more volume, or maybe able to do more impressive things in the gym overall.
Yeah.
But you still need to be evoking that tremendous effort in order to eke out more adaptation, because you're so advanced already.
Yeah.
That getting those extra gains is even more difficult per the law of diminishing returns.
I keep using this term. I keep saying to get up. It's just the phrase I've been using, where like every workout you've got to be able to get up, and it's to meet that top end level of what you're capable of, and it's like if you either do or you don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it is, I'm finding it's getting harder to get up every time. That's why, like I told you before we started, I'm considering yesterday was a planned day off from training, and I'm considering taking today off too, because I know the next workout is a daunting task. You know what I mean? It's something I enjoy and I revel in it, but it's like, it's getting harder, it's getting harder to get up.
Right. It gets harder. Like podcasting's gotten easier.
Yeah.
But this gets harder.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think a lot of that is just literally, it's your psychological perspective on that. Is like,
yeah.
And the way I've sort of thought about it is like, that's exactly what I want.
Yeah. Isn't that beautiful? You get that opportunity to challenge yourself.
Not only that though, I know that the harder it is, the better it is for what I'm trying to evoke.
Yeah, sure.
If I go and like I do a set, I'm like, okay, I'm done there, and it's like imagine, like you said, some guy comes in your gym and he's like the greatest. Never heard of him, but he's trained all these famous bodybuilders in the Middle East, and he's like the man.
Yeah.
And he comes in and you have an opportunity. He's going to run you through the ringer in a workout, and so he runs you through, and you do a set, and like he just stops you kind of short, and you're like, okay, you're done, you're good, and you're like. You would know that's not going to get shit done. Like,
right.
That's not what I wanted. Like, it has to be hard. I know this has to be just brutal.
Yeah.
I want it to be brutal because I know that's the characteristic of the set, of the stimulus that I need to evoke the adaptations that I seek.
Yeah.
So I'm seeking out the pain. Give me the pain. It's not suffering. Give me the torment.
Sure.
Bring it on, and that's a hard place to be.
Yeah.
For many people, and I think this is no way like disparaging to anyone in particular, regardless of what their mindset is. It's a bizarre thing to go and do this unnatural act, as I often call it. But I think ultimately a lot of that is psychological. Are you willing to? Do you want to do that? And are you like imagine if those Kalenjins had if that tribal sort of societal ritual had. I'm trying to think. I don't know if there's another society like that. Imagine if there was a rite of passage like that in like Norway or something like that, in the Scandinavian countries where there's lots of big and strong guys.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a perspective there. At least I know from having dated someone from Iceland that like, big and strong and hairy and monstrous is like, that's the way to be. Like, it's just fine. That's a different perspective on like what's okay and what's not. But the Kalenjin perspective is so much off in the one direction that like literally you have to have superhuman ability to withstand pain and like literally to just absolutely utterly neutralize it entirely. And they've been able to do that, and now they're just destroying people. And I don't even know. They probably now have some pretty high training technology going on there.
I'd imagine, yeah.
Yeah, because people sort of figured that out. But like those a lot of those runners were just kind of coming out of nowhere early. I was like, where are these Kenyans coming from? Like there's no like hidden like training complex,
right?
And in the mountains, like where they're doing all this, like Ivan Drago type stuff from Rocky 3. They're running them on the treadmill and injecting them with shit.
Yeah.
They just have a society that has equipped them with the mental, with basically he calls it a governor. There's a central governor, and it's released the governor. It's released the inhibition on human performance by basically neutralizing any and all pain. So
I wonder where injury falls into that, because of course I can tell myself, you could tell me and I could believe it, that I could do something that was greater than my capacity, but could I keep myself from getting injured too? I wonder how much injury, and I just wonder, because it would be a whole other topic, but there's been sets where I'm like, ooh, I feel like I could get hurt doing this, and that's a good thing to be aware of, but at the same time I feel like, am I setting myself up to get hurt by even thinking I could? Does that make sense?
That's one of the main premises of Noakes' paper.
Okay.
The title of the paper is "Fatigue is a brain-derived emotion that regulates exercise behavior to ensure the protection of the whole body homeostasis." Protection, like literally.
Protection.
Yeah, I mean, it's a protective mechanism to keep you from blowing tendons, and like completely disinhibiting and just like wrecking yourself.
So where's that line then? Because just because you can talk me into it, you can fire a starter pistol off next to my head. Should I do it? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and can you recover from that too?
Yeah, that's true too.
That has to play in. Like a lot of times, talk to a lot of powerlifters, and those guys, powerlifting beats your body up pretty bad, but they'll taper down. So maybe there's a little bit of kind of detraining or increased susceptibility to muscle soreness before they do a meet if they've tapered in. But they go and do a meet, and they're doing some warm ups, but it's nothing extraordinary. They're not trying to like create a training stimulus, but they're doing 9 efforts.
Yeah,
and if they do all 3 attempts on all 3 lifts, and they'll be beat to shit for quite a while. They'll be beaten down because most of those efforts, some of them are just like openers, so they can at least get a lift in.
Right.
But 6 of those, or 4 or 5 or 6 of those, at least 3 are badass.
Yeah.
And it just wipes them out.
I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and that's just like but it's an all-out effort. Like it's everything they got. And powerlifters are masters at disinhibiting. Like that's what Psych's about. That's what those guys are doing. And they're trying to use different than bodybuilding. They're trying to use as much muscle as possible.
Yeah.
They're trying to like use everything they possibly can. So they're not trying to focus on just the quads. They're trying to use, every ounce of leverage and muscle tissue that they possibly can. And they're trying to disinhibit across the entire body in every way, shape, or form so they can possibly move the weight from A to B.
Yeah.
So the whole body is being exposed in those lifts, or especially in the squat and the deadlift, to complete and utter, like full force, turbocharged, move this weight above at all costs. And it's just a few efforts totally wrecks the system.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So, hey, listen, what would be our take home message for anybody who's listening to this podcast today, who's wrapping this up? They're maybe at work right now. They're getting ready to go to the gym today. What would you say to these guys personally about doing what they have to do? Give me some inspiration here, Scott, for everybody who's training today.
I would take inventory on how you're prioritizing the things that go into getting a good training session in. Are you worrying about your meal timing and what kind of intra workout you're using and what you've got in your intra and what clothes you're wearing and how many warm-ups you're doing and those sorts of things, and not really thinking about the fact that you've got so much more in reserve that you're not tapping into in your mind? Are you are you a slave to your mind, or is the mind a servant to your wishes to produce the training stimulus that you want to to grow muscle.
Right
So
on.
think about your mind in that respect, and make it your bitch, so to speak.
All right, guys. Well, for another episode of Muscle Minds with Dr. Scott Stevenson, check out his book, byobbcoach.com. We also have an Amazon affiliate link to the hardcover, which is available internationally, and truenutrition.com. I put together some pricing to figure out how much it would cost to build my own version of intra workout that I like. I'll talk about that on another show, but it turns out that it's pretty cost effective to put together your own highly branched cyclic dextrin and in EAA. You get more value, plus you can put it in the ratios you want. So check that out, truenutrition.com. Use our code ADVICES. Guys, thanks for watching. Thanks, Scott.
Appreciate it. You got it, brother.